Good Sunday afternoon. This is Nicole from Pillow Talk Time at IntellectualRadio.com. Hope that you are tuning in this Sunday afternoon, focusing on domestic violence and raising awareness and putting resources out into the listening audience so that they can have a better understanding of domestic violence and how it impacts the community and resources. So for today, we have some interesting perspectives that we'll be sharing with us from the law enforcement area. So we have an attorney, defense attorney, which I think her perspective will be very neat. We also have a 911 operator, and he also has his own organization called Humanizing the Headset. And so he'll have the opportunity to discuss that. I think it's very important. And we're going to take a break at about 5:25, and we're also going to have a police officer who's going to be calling in to share information from her perspective as well. So the point is to really just put some more information out from a different lens, because domestic violence, when you look at it from different lens, you have a better understanding of how domestic violence impacts our community. So I'm going to give my panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves and to say something about their firm or their organization. And then we're going to dive directly into our questions.
Thank you. My name is Renee Amin. I am one of the owners/partners at the Berman Law Group. We're located in Waukegan, Illinois. We represent clients in Cook County, Kane County. We're pretty much all over. As I said, we're a criminal defense firm. We do some family law, but mainly our firm is a criminal defense firm in Waukegan. I guess that's really about it.
Do you want to give your contact information in case someone
our phone number
looking
is
for an attorney?
224-637-8872. We also have a website. It's www.Berman, BURMEN, lawgroup.com. And we're on Facebook, Twitter, and also Instagram. So if you're in need of an attorney, if you find yourself in a domestic situation, give us a call.
Okay. Brendan.
Hi, my name is Brendan Sears. I'm representing Humanizing the Headset, which is a website at www.humanize91.com. And basically, we're just about spreading our word, who we are and what we do. We're more than just a voice on the phone, and we're more than just dispatchers. I'm a dispatcher with the Lake County Sheriff's Office in Lake County, Illinois, where I've been for just about 11 years.
Great. So the panelists did have a set of questions that I gave for them to kind of mull over and to think about and to consider. And of course, throughout our discussion, if some other things come up or we want to talk about some other things, we certainly can do that at that time. Because again, really just want to put information out there. And so you may know things that I don't know that, I haven't brought up. So I think that's important, if that's okay with you guys.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, great. So just to kind of get us started, I just wanted to talk about from your lens, from your perspective, either as a criminal defense attorney or from a 911 operator, which are both very stressful jobs and very demanding positions, and you deal with a lot of difficult situations. But over the course of your career, your time, how significant do you see domestic violence being in our community? Is it something that the community recognizes as being significant? Or is it something that people really don't understand how serious it is and how prevalent it is? What are your thoughts about that from your perspective? Do we really understand as a society how prevalent domestic violence is?
Okay. I think it's one of those taboo things. I think it occurs a lot more frequently than many of us are willing to admit. Things like recreational drug use. Those are among those things that people do more than they want to admit that they do. For us at our agency, and I'm sure agencies all over, we get domestic calls every day, several calls a day on each shift.
Wow.
And it ranges, from just a verbal dispute, which I think in any relationship is common, but it can escalate to something, obviously, at the worst end of the spectrum as well. So obviously we don't get those calls as frequently, but we do see the calls every day, every single day.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I think domestic violence, first, let me just say, I don't condone domestic violence. Neither does my firm, although we represent people who are often accused of domestic violence or domestic battery. I do believe that it may be prevalent, but I also think that it is a tool that's sometimes misused. And what I mean by that is, a couple has an argument and someone may throw a phone, for example, and then the police are called. Well, at that moment when they call, because they're so upset and they're saying, well, he threw this phone, or he may have hit me, may have, or she may have, sometimes they may not have. And because they want that person out of the house at that time, that's the easiest thing to say. And if there's children involved, it's easy to say, well, they hit the kids as well. And so then dad or mom or whoever the offender is taken into custody. Now, that's not to say we don't have clients who actually do what they're accused of doing. We do. But I do believe that it is, there is a trend that I see in my job where people are falsely accused. Just as there are some people who are accused rightfully so. So that's kind of my take on it.
Mm-hmm. And so do you think, I just want to kind of piggyback off of what you just said, because I think it is important to understand that it's a very serious offense and it's a very serious charge. And maybe we want to kind of talk about when people are calling 911, how do they decipher, is this really something that I should involve 911 in, or is it something that, we're just having an argument? So normally, like, maybe people are calling because they're afraid, or in some cases, they just want the person to leave. So is that really the right time to call from perspective, Brendan?
I mean, it really depends on the situation. We get domestics in progress. We get domestics that are report only.
What does that mean, report only?
After the fact. A lot of times people will call and, I didn't want the police at my house. So they don't want the nosy neighbors wondering what's going on. So we can say, hey, we'll meet you at a police station. Nobody has to know what's going on. For in progress calls, it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is we have a job to do when they call. And it's to make sure that they're safe. It's to make sure our deputies are safe, our officers are safe. And if it's an in-progress call, there's questions that we have to ask. There's a protocol that we have to follow. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that, again, that everyone's safe. So we have what's called the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and weapons. So we have to make sure that those are all taken care of so that the deputy's safe and everyone's safe. So again, it really runs a spectrum from report to in progress. And if it is a report, the offender may have left already. So it may have just been in progress, but the situation is de-escalated because the offender is no longer present. Okay.
So I didn't know that someone could call 911 after something has happened. So when they're calling 911 in that situation, like, it's just to make a police report versus going to the police station?
Well, for our agency in particular, we do not have a desk officer, so we don't have an agency or a department that you can go to make that report in person. Because we're a county agency, we are all over the place. So our guys that are on the road are going to be on the road. So we can either have them meet at our department, or we can have them meet at a police department that's closer to where they are, and we'll meet them there. But we have to meet with them in person to get their side of the story. It's not information that we can take over the phone.
And so just to kind of also go back to, you were speaking about the how in some cases it's a false report. So when you're dealing with that, typically, does the person then retract the report, or are you then forced to kind of just go through the whole process? And then on the flip side, is that person then prosecuted because of the false report? How does that work?
I'm glad you asked that question. It's something that I deal with constantly. So they'll make the call, and then, I'll say the gentleman, but we know it can be either way. But the person is taken to the jail, and if they can't, post a bond, they sit there. Well, while they're fighting that case, which is usually not a quick thing, then they make up. And so the girlfriend will say, and I'm again using these partners interchangeably, but the other party may say, you know what, I changed my mind. I want to take back my statement. Well, it's too late. You can't, because the process has already started.
Mm-hmm.
Now, certainly, if you have been abused, you should absolutely call the police. But if you know that this is not what's going on, and you think you're going to recant your story, you can't then just say, I changed my mind, because you can be charged with obstruction.
Okay.
So,
I wasn't sure.
yeah, so going back and saying, well, I changed my mind, or that didn't happen, doesn't make the case go away. Sometimes we'll hear where people will say, well, I don't think my girl's going to come to court. Or I don't think the victim's going to come in. Well, that's a hard thing for a defense attorney, and here's why. The victim and the defendant ought not be having conversation. So how do you know that that person's not going to come? So that's a very risky game to play. Now, if the person doesn't come to court, you may be good. Your case will be dismissed, probably because there's no victim, unless we can bring in the 911 dispatcher, or you can bring in the police or medical reports or things of that nature. I've had cases where they have still gone through with the prosecution, although the victim did not show up.
Mm-hmm. Is that the state's prosecutor?
It's the prosecutor, right? So I always say, when you contact the police, understand that's a serious issue. That's not something that you can now go back and take back and say, I'm sorry, I changed my mind, or I still love you, baby, let's just be together, because now there's going to be bond conditions if the person bonds out, where they can't be in contact with you, or if there's children involved, those children. And then we don't think about all the other collateral consequences. Mm-hmm. Like maybe the person that's in jail was the breadwinner. And now he's gone, or she's gone. Maybe that person was the person who kept the children. So it's a very, very serious accusation, and it comes with some serious consequences. Even it can even be a felony. So
that's a good point, because I know from our show last week, and just from my own experiences, a victim will typically go back at least 7 times to his or her abuser. And this is not to discourage anyone from calling 911. So let me make this clear. This is not to discourage anyone from calling 911 if they genuinely are feeling fearful or threatened. The conversation is really about understanding that you're serious about that, and that you're really at the point where I need law enforcement to engage in the situation. Because the worst thing you want to do is get in a situation and then you get in trouble because you've recanted or that sort of thing.
Can I interject on that?
Yes.
Sometimes people will call for domestic situations. The deputies will arrive on scene and then decide that they don't want a report taken. A lot of times things will happen in the heat of the moment, and they think it might escalate into something else, so they call the police as a precaution. They will get there. Everyone in these situations are adults, so we don't want to arrive and be like, you're going to jail. If it's something that's kind of a low risk situation where the deputies or responding officers feel that it can be worked out amicably among the two people, then that's fine. I mean, if we get a call an hour later, for the same thing, obviously that changes things. So it really depends on the severity of the situation and the officers that are responding, how they'll proceed from there. But as you said, once a report is taken, that changes things.
Okay. And so just so that victims can understand, if there's a victim that's watching or listening, when the victim, he or she calls 911, and the officers arrive, kind of walk me through that scenario of what that looks like when the officers do arrive. Do you stay on the line with them, or are you disconnected at that point?
Well, when the deputies arrive, we don't really have a reason to stay on the phone anymore. I've in ride-alongs have been on domestics, but my personal experience in that is very limited. Typically, parties will be separated so that the stories can be taken, so that they can try to weed out who's telling the truth and who might be not telling the truth. If there's children there, they want to get them separated so that it doesn't become a situation there. If someone is arrested, they obviously don't want to arrest the offender in front of the children. They kind of want to keep it as calm and serene or peaceful as it possibly can be given the situation, which I know sounds ironic.
Right.
But.
So I'm just thinking, since you brought up the issue with children, how often do you get those calls where it's actually or in situations where it's actually the child trying to advocate for the person that's being abused? Do you get a lot of phone calls from children where the abuse is like in progress? And then do you have situations where you see like a court has taken over because the child is, in danger and that sort of thing? Do you see that a lot with domestic violence cases or situations?
It happens. I don't want to say it's terribly frequently, but it does happen, and it's difficult because depending on the child's age, they might not understand what's happening, especially if it's the first time. So you really have to approach it delicately. Talk to them as if they're a person. You always want to do that anyway, but you kind of have to really go at it with the kids in that way. Mm-hmm. Ask them what's going on. Ask them, if someone hits somebody, if anyone needs an ambulance. Reassure them that everything is going to be okay, that the police are going to get there to help them, and everything will be fine. Mm-hmm. So because they might be hysterical again because they don't really know what's going on. Sometimes it will shock you because the kids will just be as calm as ever. Oh, mom and dad are fighting. Oh, okay.
Because it's normal. Right. The dysfunction is normal,
right?
Which is unfortunate. And then when you're defending the person that's accused of domestic violence, can you kind of speak to the perspective of, do they think about do they articulate that they're thinking about how the children have been impacted? Do they consider that? And does that play into the severity of the consequence if children are involved?
I think it does. I've had very few clients who have not, when their children are involved, who have not considered their children. Maybe they lost control, and I'm not making excuses, but maybe they lost control, or the argument just got too bad, or maybe it's something that happens on the regular. I will say though, in our practice, we do criminal defense, but we do some family law. In our family law, we only represent dads. Let me tell you why that's important. Thank you. Let me tell you why that's important to the domestics. Oftentimes we'll get a person, or it'll be a dad, who will come in for a family law case, and he'll say, but I'm fighting this domestic and this OP. And OP is what we call an order of protection. And he'll say, I'm fighting this OP and this domestic. And I'll say, okay, now those are different cases from the family law case. But what normally happens is those cases merge together and they're taken to family court. Now, that's important because if you have mom and dad fighting, and maybe mom wants to keep the kids, or it could be vice versa, then this is a good setup for it, right?
Okay.
So sometimes, more often than not, we will see those types of domestics that law, and there's the children, and we have to say, so first the first thing I have to do is fight the order of protection, because I have to get the children out as protected parties so that they can have visitation with their dad or their mom, which can be a battle all in itself. So that's another separate hearing. And then once I do that, then I have to deal with the domestic battery case. Once I deal with the domestic battery, then I have to, only then can I deal with the family law case. So children are oftentimes considered. And for me and LaTanya in our practice, we have to fight very hard for that domestic battery case, because that may impact the visitation with the minors later on. So when it's children, it's a lot to consider. And, it's hard for us because sometimes we will see victims who have truly, truly been abused.
Right.
They've been hurt, but I still have to.
But you still have to, right, because they still are entitled to a defense.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Can we talk really quickly about orders of protection?
Yes.
So basically what those are, emergency orders of protection are granted for about 30 days. The good thing about these is if you are involved in a domestic situation and the offender is arrested, they can't return to the residence for 72 hours. So during that time, if you get that order of protection, they can be served when they come back. If they're arrested and they end up staying in jail for another issue, maybe they have an outstanding warrant or whatever, they can be served with that order of protection while they're still in jail, and then they can't return to the house at all. So that works well in your favor. So when you go back to court, about a month later, then the issue can be worked out further from there.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification, because I was wondering about that. I was going to follow up. So we're going to take a brief break. I'm actually going to be, a police officer will be phoning in to give her perspective, and she's going to chime in with us from the phone. So give us about 2 minutes. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to give her a call and bring her back in. So we'll be right back on IntellectualRadio.com.
All right.
And we're back from our brief break on IntellectualRadio.com. This is Pillow Talk Time, and this is Nicole. I'm your host, and I have a 911 operator from humanizing the headset, and we have an attorney from Berman Law Group in Waukegan. And if you're just tuning in, we've been talking about what it looks like when we've talked about from the perspective of a person accused and what that looks like in the court system, and also, which is really important, the understanding of that, the seriousness of those charges, and when we do call 911 and when we do press charges, that we really need to make sure that it's really that type of situation, which is important. I do believe it's important. And we just left off when we were talking about how these situations impact children. And we talked about how important it is in dealing with domestic violence that we consider children and their responses. So on the line, I actually have a very dear friend of mine who is a former beat cop for Chicago Police Department, and she actually now train cadets in the police academy. So she has an interesting perspective, and she's going to chime in with the conversation with us. And we're going to kind of move forward in our discussion. So Shinya Ray, are you still there?
I am here.
Okay.
Yes.
It's actually my children's godmother too.
Oh, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We're well.
So thank you for joining us. Shinya Ray, if you want to I just had a quick question because we're trying to get perspectives from different vantage points. And so yours obviously is very important because as a police officer, you would respond to domestic violence calls once the call was made to 911. And just from your lens or from your vantage point, when you would get a domestic violence call and you're radioed, what type of immediate thoughts go through your mind as a police officer in preparing for receiving that sort of phone call? How are you preparing yourself, and what are you thinking about going into that type of situation?
Well, the first thing that we're trained to think and we're trained to actually be prepared for is the well-being of the victim. That is always priority, to make sure that we render aid to the victim, to make sure that the victim is the first person that we will want to talk to, the first person that we will want to make sure, do we see any visible signs of any injuries or things like that. So in route to that call, you're always concerned, like, what are the severity of the injuries? What is the victim going through? We need to get there because we don't know the level of stress that they're under. We don't know the level of danger that they may be facing at that moment.
And would you say, because last week we had on the show, we had several agencies from Chicago who offer resources to victims. And one of the things that I can say about Chicago is that Chicago is very rich in resources for victims of domestic violence. And just thinking about that, when we're talking about just domestic violence in general, when a victim is calling and they're needing assistance, how much time would you typically spend then deciphering, like, is this a situation that we need to stay for? Is this a situation where we can refer this person to another agency? Do you do that? Does a police officer do that as far as, like, if you're deciding not to take a report, do you have conversations with the parties that are involved, or does your time with them end at that point?
Yes, and we absolutely do. So again, we have to assess the situation and, again, the severity of it. Obviously, the more serious events where the victim is severely injured or injured to whatever degree, we will always, again, arrest the offender if the offender is present on the scene, if he hasn't fled the scene. But if the victim is injured, we 100% make sure that we render aid, get a paramedic, get an ambulance, transport them to the hospital, or if it doesn't go that route, let's just say they refuse the medical attention, but still have injuries, we still would 100% allow them, that they have the right to get an order of protection. We give them documentation based on that incident, so we document everything. We give them a case number. We make sure that they understand that they can go seek a warrant for an arrest. Again, all this stuff is documented. All this stuff is issued to the victim in terms of information. We have hotlines, again, that's on the documentation, and we actually issue the victim. We call the victim information notice.
Okay.
So we issue them the victim information notice that has all the different information on it that they have a right to as a victim. Again, shelters, women's shelters, things of that nature that they have access to 24/7 in the case that they need to relocate without calling the police, if that's what they chose not to do. So there are different ways that they can, I guess, escape the situation for the moment if they chose not to call the police. But if we are there, we're going to tell them everything that they can do as a result of the situation, 100%.
So now we talked a little bit earlier about victims for whatever reason, perhaps maybe they changed their mind in the midst of a call, or they changed their mind, while the case is carrying on. Have you ever had any situations where you've responded to a call, and when you get there, the victim decides that he or she does not want to, go forward with your interaction with the accused? And have there been situations where you all decided to take the report, even though the victim, him or herself, decided that they didn't want to press charges? Have you done that before? What does that look like?
Yeah. So okay. So that's a later question. So,
right.
So what I'll do is I'll take the second part to that question. Yes, we have been in situations where the victim may not have wanted to press charges. However, the state of Illinois requires us to make that arrest. The state of Illinois requires us to arrest that offender because in the event that we leave, something else happens, now we're liable for that. So it is a mandatory arrest, whether the victim wants to press charges or not. Okay. But before that law came about, we always have to document the events that happened. So there was a time where if the victim did not want to press charges, we did not lock up the offender. When those cases happened, we still were required to document it, to give a report. And then we would just write in our narrative that the victim did not want to press charges at that time.
Okay.
Which left the door open to say that in another event, call us back, and then we'll make the arrest. So the victim has always been left with different options. Like, we didn't want the victim to think that it was just the end all because today she didn't want to press charges, or he didn't want to press charges.
So that kind of leads me to my next question. And thinking about that, how often did you find yourself going back to the same home? And how often did that happen? Because we talked last week that for victims, it typically takes a victim at least 7 times to decide that he or she is going to leave the abusive situation. Based on your experiences, would you say that that statistic is accurate as far as what you've seen, because you've had to go back to a home a number of times to intervene?
Well, in my personal experience, we never revisited a situation, I'm going to say on average, more than about 2 to 3 times. Because typically what happens is the day that event takes place, the day that the incident takes place, emotions, feelings, and things are kind of out of control. And everybody's kind of on board. The victim is on board with everything that needs to be done in order to get this offender behind bars so that they can feel a sense of safety, so that they can feel a sense of freedom, if you will. So at that time, because emotions are high and things of that nature, we do make the arrest. I would say somewhere along the court date is when the victims typically have a change of mind. Mm-hmm. So it's not that it's fresh on the scene that day. It's typically along the lines of the process. So again, the court date may be 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away, depending on the severity of the situation. That being said, that's time for emotions to cool down, things to become a little bit more, and again, there may be a change of heart. So I would say, yes, based on my experience, we never visited a home on average more than about 2 to 3 times. So because again, we just can't continue to, and that's why the law came out according to the state, that when those allegations are made, we have to make the mandatory arrest, because we cannot continue to come back 7 or 8 times with the same family, with the same issue, because things typically can get worse. Mm-hmm. And we just don't want to have the victims' lives put in jeopardy that much more. And that, we don't need to allow it to be entertained that long.
And that makes sense what you said, because earlier our attorney was speaking about how when she steps in, at this point sometimes a victim will recant or a victim doesn't want to move forward. So that's a good point that you bring that up, and then it's just left to the state prosecutor as far as how he or she is going to handle that. What you're going to say?
Can I just piggyback off of that briefly? So the officer says, it's a mandatory arrest. And I get that, because, of course, going into any domestic situation is dangerous. But with that mandatory arrest, what people don't realize is what comes after. So now, she's correct, it's usually probably not on the scene that they change their mind. They change their mind as they're going through the court process. And as they're going through that and they've had a change of heart, victims counselors are often trying to reach out to them, especially in Lake County. They're trying to reach out to them, and sometimes they can reach them, sometimes they can't. If the victim then decides, I don't know if I'm going to go through with this, like I said earlier, they could be charged with obstruction. But if there's children involved, they're also threatened with DCFS. Mm-hmm. And DCFS can come in and indicate that parent, the victim, because they did not leave the offender.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a good point. Because I've seen in some of my DV groups on Facebook, I've seen where the victims did not go forward with the charges, but now they're upset because DCFS has come in and said, you're not protecting your children by not pressing charges, so we're going to remove the children from the home. And it becomes such a stressful situation for the victim, because nobody wants to lose their kids.
Right.
But if, speaking from a victim's perspective, if she or he has decided not to press charges because of a financial situation, mm-hmm. maybe the abuser is the breadwinner, or they literally have nowhere else to go, or they're in that type of situation where they have to choose between shelter or letting this person stay in the home, and they instinctively choose, I'm going to let this person stay, but then not realizing that DCFS then can come in and say, well, this is an unsafe environment for your children, which is very, very tough. on the victim and also on the obviously on the children as well.
It's almost as if, because I represent some of those people too through DCFS, I do some of those appeals, and it's almost as if the victim is being victimized again by the system because they are saying, I don't want to go through with this. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know what threshold, is too much or not. I just don't know because I don't go through domestic violence. But from the people that I've represented, I think it's more to it than the law says. The law says, yes, it's a mandatory arrest. But what about all those collateral consequences that comes after that? No one thinks of that. And then when that victim has to go lay in that bed at night with her kids and they're homeless or they're trying to figure out what they're going to eat, those are horrible situations, especially when you have the state's attorney saying, if you don't testify, I'm going to subpoena you. If you don't come in, I'm going to issue a body attachment. Or if you don't come in, I'm going to have DCFS come and take your children. And then oftentimes these people are, people who can't afford attorneys to come and fight their case in DCFS. So there are a lot of things that I think have to be thought about when we're making these accusations. I mean, like I said earlier, if you've been abused, surely you should call the police. But if you're just angry, I think you really need to think it through.
That's a good point. And I will say, just from experience, you're right. The state's prosecutor is very diligent, and that's the only word that I can use right now, in going through the case if there's an abuser and if there's children involved. So that's definitely an excellent point that you're bringing up, that this idea of there's so many facets to this idea of domestic violence, and by having so many pieces to domestic violence, I think that's where this idea, if we just think about society globally, we just don't want to deal with domestic violence, right? Because there's so many different factors. We don't want to, it's like you were saying, this idea of, okay, what is domestic violence? Because, perception is reality, and I may think it's one thing and someone else may think it's another. Now, let me ask you this before I go to my next question. Is there a legal definition of what is considered domestic violence?
Yes, there is. Legally, domestic violence is, and people oftentimes get this mixed up. Domestic violence is going to be violence that is brought on by people in a familial relationship, meaning, or a household relationship. So meaning you live in the same home or you are related to someone. And my kids and I just had this conversation about a week ago. It is not, and sometimes it can be boyfriend and girlfriend if you live in the same house. But sometimes you'll have people where they'll run down and they'll say, I'm going to go get an order of protection because, or no stalking order because, I don't know, Nicole stalked me, or because you were Brendan's baby's mama or something. That's not the
Brendan and I
same
do not
thing.
have children, by the way.
Right. It was just an example. That is not that's not domestic battery. It's battery. It's not domestic.
I'm glad you brought that up. I did not know that.
Right.
So
and when people go down and say, I want to get this order of protection, well, you can't get it based on certain things. You can get a no stalking order, but then you have to show that there's been a certain amount of events that have occurred in order for you to get that no stalking.
Right. That's why it's important to report.
Right.
Oh, so does the report then add on, like if it's a stalking issue, the reports will be evidence of that?
So let me just so we can all be clear. If, let's say, you and I were having an altercation over time, and or you decided to maybe when I up in the parking lot, and then I go run down and I say, I want to get an order of protection. Well, what should happen is they should deny me because we don't have a familial relationship.
Wow, I did not know this. Okay.
What they should do though is, or what I should be asking for, is a no stalking. But you're really out not be able to get that either because it's only been one incident. So the thing is that, and I know why judges do what they do. They do it because they don't want anyone to get killed, basically, and they don't want to be responsible for that. So they issue those OPs out like candy, which, by the way, can never, ever, ever be sealed or expunged.
Oh, so you might want to say that again, because I don't think.
When you call and you get an order of protection on someone, it cannot be sealed. It cannot be expunged. Even if your case is won and dismissed, that order of protection will remain on your record forever.
Wow,
So
I
that
did
means
not
when
know
you
that.
go to look for an apartment, guess what they see?
And that's what I was going to ask. Can
Yep.
employers see that
Yes.
apartment
Yes.
Leases and that sort of thing?
Yes.
Wow.
And with the no stalking, now I've seen some judges in Cook County and they stick to it. They're like, nope, you didn't have enough incidents. And that's fair. But it's really a thin line. It's a tricky line that,
Mm-hmm. So I guess it kind of leads me into my next question, because there's so many pieces to that. My next question is, in just having this conversation, we're all professionals and we have different vantage points related to domestic violence. What do you think then are things that we need to be doing as a society, as a community, as a whole? And the only reason why I bring that up is because, even with the Me Too movement going on right now, we'll see a lot of information come out about politicians, or we'll see a lot of information about, famous people and athletes. Domestic violence is rampant in the athletic community, and church communities, just because people of power and people of influence. And we think about, like, how are we going to address this? But what do you think are some of the things we need to start doing as a society just to open up the conversation so that we can curb what's happening, instead of saying, to a victim, like, why did you stay? Like, why did you put up with this? Because that's always the question, right? How can we change the conversation to, why is this person abusing? And how can we change the conversation to, what mechanisms do we have in place in society? Number one, to treat an abuser. Number two, to deal with the issues that feed into the abuse or the trauma. What can we do collectively, do you think, from your perspective, to try to put a curb on this? Because it's a very serious issue. As I've done my research, domestic violence, the highest cases are African-American women. The cases of domestic violence in the LGBTQ community is extreme, because it's a double whammy, because as LGBTQ, you already have something working against you. And so then to go and report domestic violence, it's like, a shaming sort of thing. So how do we deal with this? How do we manage this? Just from your perspective, as a police officer, as an attorney, as a 911 operator who's focusing on the humanistic side. How do we manage that? How do we deal with that? What are your thoughts?
Who wants to go first?
Shini Ray, you want to go? Go ahead, Shini Ray. You can go first.
I think that we're doing a pretty good job, as best that we can, with what goes on now. I mean, the call comes through, the police answers the call, it goes through the whole legal process. I think that as time goes on, we are more aware. And I think that over time, even from when I first got on the police force for Chicago 19 years ago, it has come a longer way even since then. With social media, I think that social media has certainly has heightened the awareness of it and the things that we can do. The different organizations. One thing that I did fail to mention too, that every police district in Chicago has what we call a domestic violence liaison, and that is an officer that designates domestic violence families who've been victims of that type of abuse. And also, I wanted to add too that domestic violence is not only a lot of times physical abuse; it is financial abuse, it is emotional abuse. So
absolutely,
it can have so many different layers to domestic violence. Again, that domestic violence liaison that every district has is very instrumental, because that is their sole responsibility. That's their primary responsibility as an officer, is to keep the follow-up with the cases that they have in that particular district. So they're very instrumental in making sure that these victims and the children are okay.
So can I just ask you a quick question, Shini Ray?
Plenty of follow-up after the event has taken place.
So if a victim is listening in the Chicagoland area, in the city, how would they get in touch with a domestic violence liaison? Do they just call the community policing center? Or do they just...
Absolutely. Again, that is also the information that is on the victim's information notice that is issued to the victim the day of the event, the day that the incident actually takes place.
Okay.
So again, all these different things are explained by those lead officers The information is right there in black and white on that documentation, and it's up to the victim to follow through, just like with the court date. And these things are also re-emphasized and reinforced through the court process. So state attorneys and things like that will also reinforce what they have the legal right to have access to. The domestic violence liaison officer, the orders of protection, things of that nature. All those things are reinforced through the whole court process as well.
Okay.
And can I just to clarify briefly, the officer said that domestic violence can include financial and physical and mental abuse. It can definitely be mental and physical abuse. I have not represented a client who has been charged with financial domestic battery, so that if people are listening and they decide he's withholding money, let me call the police. I don't know.
Do you get those types of calls?
Factor. It's a factor, maybe.
No. Let me clarify.
Okay.
Let me clarify that. No, it's not that you can charge it with withholding money.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah. So
right.
No, it's not just it's not that element. The element is like Nicole mentioned earlier. When he's the breadwinner, he may use the fact that he makes the money now to not buy things necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
To make the family continue to be productive in the necessary things from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
That is financial abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That is financial abuse.
Correct. When you're not providing now because you're angry or because whatever the situation is, you're using that, your finances to not provide the way you need to as a financial provider.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So that is what we're saying that is part of
Right.
how a person can be victimized.
Right.
That's a good point.
I just think as an attorney,
Right. Good point.
As an attorney, for me, I just wanted us to be clear about that because, I don't want anyone to get the wrong information.
Right. I don't want Brennan getting 911 calls saying my husband won't let me have access to the savings account. We can't do that.
Right.
No, Brendan.
No, I'm not saying that's something that we charge them with,
Right.
but I'm saying that that's just part of what could be
A
an issue
form
in
of
terms
abuse.
the abuse.
Right.
So in other words, people just think that it's always a physical abuse situation. I'm letting it be known that it is also emotional abuse. It is also mental abuse. It is also, again, financial abuse. Not that they can get charged with it, but I just want to have it, make people aware that you are being abused in a domestic situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical all the time.
Right. And I think that's definitely one of the things with domestic violence is some people don't even realize they're in a situation like that. They don't recognize that that's a form of abuse.
Right.
Brennan, what were you going to say?
And that's all I was trying to say. It is a form of abuse.
Right.
Not necessarily say that we go through the whole legal channels with it.
Absolutely.
But it is a form of abuse.
Absolutely. Brennan?
I just think that some of the things that we can do are things that are just like this. Bringing a heightened awareness to it, letting people know that there are advocacy groups out there for them. In Lake County, we have a website. It's findhelplc.org.
Say it one more time.
Findhelplc, like lakecounty.org.
Okay.
And it provides information on any type of support that you need for anything, financial issues, homelessness, domestic abuse, anything like that. And it's updated fairly regularly. It's definitely something to look out for, to check it out, to see if you meet some of the criteria for some of the things that they offer.
Well, that's good. There's a checklist, so you can kind of go through.
Yes, it'll give you options like what is it that you're looking for, and
Great.
then we'll bring up the results for you. I think another thing is prevention. I remember reading something that said when someone shows you who they are for the first time, believe it.
Because it's the truth.
A lot of times we find ourselves in these situations because they've snowballed into these situations. And rather than getting out sooner, we've waited till later to where it's more difficult to do so.
That was absolutely my situation.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking back, there were clear signs, but I just not thinking. And then, years later, then now it's turned into something else. And it's a huge thing when I could have just, recognized it and did what I needed to do years prior. But go ahead. You're correct.
I mean, that's pretty much it. Just advocacy, prevention, and awareness. I think people, when they call me, they're kind of hesitant to talk sometimes. And, we dispatchers, we've heard it all. You can tell us anything freely and we're going to help you. That's what we're here for. So don't be afraid to let your emotions out and tell us what you need. we're here to help, and we're happy to help you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I think that one of the other things, or a couple of the other things we could do, is we have to start looking at our mentally ill people.
Oh, goodness.
And
Absolutely.
I
Good point.
say that not to make excuses for clients, but oftentimes, more often than not, the people who are abusing have been abused. And we have to learn how to really have the hard conversations, get into schools and start talking and educating people and children on what domestic violence actually is. Latanya and I, we do a lot in the community where we try to educate. We do videos online where we try to educate people about the law and what's happening. And a lot of times when we're dealing with those people, you will find, and they may present as normal, but there are some mental health issues. And if we don't start addressing those issues, we're going to have more and more of these cases, and they're going to escalate because we are only putting Band-Aids over issues instead of dealing with them.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
The mental health aspect is a topic in and of itself.
Right.
Absolutely. I do, before we close, I do want to give Brendan the opportunity. One of the things I had posed a question to him was related to kind of myths or things about code words or code sayings that, like, if a victim is calling 911, because I see it all the time in my DV groups, and like the black dot on the hand and all of these things. Can you just kind of just put out there for our audience? Is there such a thing as this code word that you guys know automatically it's a DV and the person doesn't want to call and say, "Oh, I'm being"? Does that really even exist?
No.
Okay.
Not
Make that clear.
Not even in the slightest. And it's funny though, because it's brought so much awareness to its fakeness that a lot of us are aware of it. But the problem is that when you call, you don't know who you're getting. And depending on your area, we're all different. All of the agencies are different. We're all trained differently. We all have different protocols. And this is not one of them for anyone. I think at this point, for me personally, if someone was to call and say that, after a couple seconds, it might click. But I mean, we also get prank calls too.
Right.
So when people call, I want to order pizza, like, okay, yeah, whatever, So don't believe that. We don't. A pepperoni does not mean there's battery involved.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Because I've heard this and I'm like, that can't be right.
Yeah,
that
no,
can't be true.
It's not. Training for dispatchers is different across agencies, and it can be very intense depending on where you are and depending on how quickly an agency needs you on the floor as a viable dispatcher. So what am I trying to say here? We have tricks. And if you aren't able to speak, we might ask you yes or no questions if you're unable to give details. I remember I took a call for prescription fraud at a pharmacy, and the offender was standing right in front of the caller. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll ask a series of yes or no questions to get the information that I need. We can also touch the phone once for yes or twice for no, things like that. Those aren't something that's are tools that are taught immediately. Those are something that's learned along the way. So again, it depends on who you're talking to. So don't assume that the person that you're calling knows what's happening. Never assume that. And we can't assume either. Right. We have to be as thorough as we can to make sure that we're getting you the resources that you need, and that we're making sure that we're keeping our officers safe. So
okay, good point. So in closing, is there anything that you would want to say to either perhaps a victim, either what they can expect when they call you, or for a victim as far as like what he or she can expect when they go to court? Just some final information that perhaps you want to share out for victims or family members of victims or abusers, just to kind of understand from your lens, just some final information or thing that they should probably be aware of that we may not have touched base on.
I think when you call, stay on the phone. Please don't hang up. It's very risky. I mean, if we don't have the information that we need, we have no idea what we're going into. I mean, we don't know if the offender's still on scene. We don't know if there's weapons involved. I mean, these are very serious things that can have very serious consequences to them if we don't know that information. So stay on the phone with us. There's a reason that we're asking the questions that we ask. And I know that in the time that the things are happening, it might not seem like it's important, but it is. Please just trust us in that. It's for our safety. It's for your safety. It's very important. So please just stay on the line. If you can't, put the phone down and leave it open so that at least we can hear what's going on. Okay. That's also very important. I've had situations where I've had an open line and the offender lied to me about what was happening. And one of the great things that dispatchers have is intuition. It's natural and it's learned. And I didn't believe him. So I'm like, okay, well, let me stay on the phone here and see what's really going on. He put the phone down and I'm like, okay, so he's lying. So it helped the deputies when they got there to know exactly what was going on. They knew how to proceed when they got there. Okay. So always stay on the phone.
Good point. Always. Shinyure, is there anything you wanted to share if there's a victim listening? What he or she something that is an important point that they need to know in relation to the situation that they're in?
Yes, absolutely. To close, let me just say this before the conversation closes totally. I 100% appreciate and value the dispatchers because their job is very stressful, and they, again, the first person that's in contact with victim situations, and they have to relay the information to the beat officer. So I appreciate their role in the whole police communication system. Same thing with attorneys. At some point, it reaches their courtroom, it reaches a file that they now have to deal with the situations on kind of like the back end of everything. So collectively, we all have a great responsibility relative to these different situations.
Absolutely.
So as a police officer, yes, as a police officer, I would say to tell the truth about the matter. The more information we know, the more we can document it, the better we can document it, and the better we can move forward with, again, getting some kind of protection, getting some kind of legal help to make sure that the victims are not re-victimized. So I just think that in telling the truth, that way we kind of have an idea of everything that you're going through so that we can, again, put things in place to make sure that the families are safe.
Okay, so we have stay on the line, we have being truthful and being as factual as possible for your protection and the protection of others. And
I just want to say that, of course, I'm grateful for our first responders, dispatchers, police. It may seem like we're on different teams and we're fighting, but we're not. My job is simply just to represent my client. But in doing that, clients, tell your attorneys the truth. Tell me everything. Because if you don't tell me everything and I go into the courtroom, I always tell my clients, I need to be the smartest one in there. Meaning I need to know more about your case than anyone else. So it's nothing like walking in and then you find out maybe he did have a domestic against the same victim on 3 prior occasions. And when you talk to me, you said, no, I didn't have anything. So just tell us the truth. We're not going to judge you. We're not. All I care about is the outcome of your case. That's it. So tell us everything. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you. So this concludes our broadcast tonight on IntellectualRadio.com, Pillow Talk Time. Make sure you tune in next week at 5 p.m. We'll be discussing the role of the church and what role does the church have in dealing with trauma of its congregants, specifically related to domestic violence. Again, because the majority of victims are as part of that congregation. So tune in. I appreciate my panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys.
Bye. And again, so Pillow Talk Time, IntellectualRadio.com. Also, you can find us on our website. Turn this off. PillowTalkPrettyThings.com, Instagram, Pillow Talk Pretty Things, Facebook, Pillow Talk Pretty Things. And on my website, of course, there are a number of resources for victims. And you want to say your okay, we're good.